Safe Harbour. We started a countdown. Over those 3 months, time slowed to a crawl, like those turtles that go slowly but surely halfway across the world. The closer the time got to her arrival, the more excruciating the mixed cocktail of anxiety and longing. The night before Maggie arrived, I lay awake. As the old man used to say, I didn't catch a wink. She called me from every stop along the way, from payphones on the long journey from Shanghai to St. John's. I stood with a hand-drawn sign saying, "Welcome home, Maggie," all in caps. I watched her come down the escalator, arriving somewhat like an astronaut. Her hair had grown even more wild, and she'd lost weight. We held each other until eventually we knew we had to stop, for we were suffocating. We both had big changes going on in our bodies, as if love itself were a virus. Something about her cloche hat and her posture made me feel she belonged, as maybe her mother did, to the jazz age, to the age of suffragettes. I dropped the homemade bulky sign, made a poster board that wobbled like an accordion as we watched the carousel go round and round until finally it brought her suitcase and a box that said, "Handle with care." "That was out of this world," she said. Outside, the rain slashed down on the roads and street lights, and the wind blew a gale. The poster board blew from my hands and bounced down the parking lot like a tumbleweed. In the car, eyes welled up out of joy, both overcome with relief and possibility. As we drove through the city, we looked like those fools, or at least that was how the old man described them, that you see kissing when they stop at traffic lights. We headed up the slanted stairs in the apartment, stopping to look at each other in the hallway mirror, like we were posing for a picture in a photo booth. Maggie didn't know which way to turn, which room to go to. I planted her on the couch and then went off to make tea. When I returned, she broke the silence. "Well, here we are." She stood up and went to the window, pointing and naming the things that were iconic: Signal Hill, the Newfoundland Railway, the Battery. I explained why I nicknamed the apartment the Crow's Nest, for it had the view of the Narrows and the ocean, just like the place downtown where once soldiers waited and wondered. I looked around the room for things I've been wanting to share, books and movies and photographs. "Strange, isn't this?" she said. "Life," I said, awkwardly. "Love you, Nutbar," she said. We just laid there holding each other, reunited like lost children. I left her to sleep, just as she had done for me in the hotel months ago, when I was jet-lagged visiting her in China. When Maggie woke, I was the one watching the spring rain slash at the windows of row houses down the lane. "Can you imagine being out on the ocean in this?" I said. "Rough seas indeed." That first night together, both back home again, we ordered a load of Chinese food, and I popped in The Last Waltz on VHS. "It begins at the end," I said. "It begins now," she said. "It begins now," I said, holding her hand tightly.
The lights were sickeningly bright. Colors, noises, smells, a lively crowd, all dancing and swaying merrily to the beat of the roaring music. Sounds like a rager, right? Well, that'd be wrong. This was a festival of sorts. All throughout the streets people celebrated. Vendors were selling their goods, and right in the center of the commotion was one Adrian Bird, trying his best to not get trampled while browsing the market. Tonight's festival is a special one, a Valentine's Day celebration. Baked goods and large bouquets lined off the sidewalk, and our dear fellow Adrian had just paid for his own bouquet. Deep scarlet roses tucked snugly into bundles of baby's breath. Despite all of the hustle and bustle of the crowded streets, Adrian had been spotted by the one man he'd feared running into the most, his co-worker and frenemy, Jonah Phillips. Though he tried to blend in with the crowd and ignore Jonah, Adrian felt a hand clasp onto his shoulder and heard that oh-too-familiar husky voice. "Hey, Shortstack, didn't think you'd be out buying flowers today. Some poor lady finally drop her standards low enough to date you?" Adrian turned his head to face Jonah, a grimace befalling his face at the snarky comment. Those jade-green eyes of Jonah's were full of mischief, as per usual. And I didn't think you'd be pestering me today. I guess that means that no ladies drop their standards for you, Joe." Jonah gave him a playful elbow before slicking back his ash-brown hair, a smirk playing on his lips. "Okay, feisty. Geez," he said with a laugh. Adrian kept his steely eyes forward, still walking straight towards his car. "I'm leaving now, so buzz off." Jonah cackled at Adrian's unenthusiastic retort, deciding to annoy him further. "Come on, just tell me who the flowers are for. I'm not a snitch." Jonah's cheeky tone is enough to make Adrian chuckle as he scratches the blonde stubble on his chin while glancing around. "Nobody of your concern, Joe. Now stop being so nosy. It's why you always get turned down by girls, you know," Adrian teases, getting back at Jonah for his constant quips. Deep down, despite their bickering, Adrian had a soft spot for Jonah and his antics. They were nearing Adrian's car, straying further from the crowd. As they approached it, Jonah looked down at him, the lights of the festival still twinkling in his eyes. His gaze is soft as he speaks, a low chuckle ringing out from his lips. "I hate you." His words made Adrian smile. As he unlocked his car door, he turned his head, meeting Jonah's stare. "I hate you more." With that, he put one foot into his car, then the other, before slamming the door and driving off. Jonah couldn't help but to watch with a longing look, feeling a bit blue now that their brief encounter had ended. After enjoying the festival for a little while longer, Jonah, too, decided to make his leave. However, upon arriving home, he'd found that his door was already unlocked. He felt more intrigued than anything, taking another step inside. A soft smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he looked at his kitchen table. Sitting there was Adrian's bouquet, sitting beautifully in a clear vase with a little white bow tied around the neck. As he looked closer, he noticed a little note hanging from the side. He inspected it closely. It only read 4 words. "To Joe, with love."
You are the soft reflection of nature. The sweetest words that forever my heart enchanted, stills my woe, and more gently I embark. For that which can traverse 10,000 years stands forcefully against erosion of my heart. With haggard tongue, the finest wine from years lifts my thirst as eyes befriend the dark. Then senses mirth-filled and groggy find solace against an unrelenting parch. Jubilant lilacs blooming under summer's breath, it is this my senses fully crave. And, enthralled by their contentment, these alone move me, more compassionate I behave. A gentle night to dawn gives way. Come quickly, let us not a heartbeat waste. Cascading rays, my nurtured heart flutters. Blinking, the moment passes, and the day begins its haste. A warm hug so genuine, your kiss upon my cheek, an ocean of love, my heart adrift. Intuitively, no reason I seek. You are a delightful dawn, a child's kiss, the taste of wine so sweet, a fragrant flower that fills the air, and inspiring words that render me meek. You are the soft reflection of nature. In awe I stand and greet. Your shadows dance their merriment. Your winds circle leaves at my feet. We'll dance this dance forever, like waves upon the shore. Our ebb and flow and natural balance carves my unshakable quest for more.
The Gannets of Cape St. Mary's. The tour bus bounced through the potholes on the road to Cape St. Mary's. Joan peered out the window, trying to discern the landscape through the fog. And the tour guide came on the speaker. "On average, fog covers the coastline here 200 days a year," she said in her chirpy voice. "But don't worry. Even in the fog, this is one of the best places in the world to see gannets up close." Joan, a retired teacher from Ontario, had always been interested in bird watching. Her husband, Bill, passed away 3 years ago, and they often enjoyed birding in the local parks. Bill had talked about visiting Newfoundland to see the seabird colonies, so she booked this tour to see it for them both. Joan grabbed her jacket, and as she was climbing down the steps of the bus, she stumbled. Glenn, the bus driver, caught her. "Are you okay?" He looked at her, concerned. Not wanting to appear needy, she shook him off, telling him she was fine. They had sat together at lunch, as most of the group were couples. As she talked with him, he shared that he too was widowed. Anne was in the lead, warning them the cliffs were over 100 meters high, and it was hard to see the edge of the trail in the fog. Joan saw Glenn wagging his finger at her, telling her to be careful, but she brushed past him and headed off. As she walked, the sounds and smells of the birds intensified, but the fog prevented her from seeing anything. Suddenly, the mist parted, and she was standing on a point of land about 10 meters from a sea stack that was completely covered with the most striking and elegant birds Joan had ever seen. She sucked in her breath and thought to herself that Bill would have loved this. Overcome with emotion, Joan stepped back and found a rock where she was able to sit and observe the spectacle through tear-rimmed eyes. She heard someone approach and looked up to see Glenn. "May I sit next to you?" he asked. She offered a place next to her on the rock. The two sat in silence and watched as a large gannet landed next to its mate on a ledge. The pair of birds gently turned their long, slender necks towards each other, and their bills met in a ritualistic exchange. "Look, it's like they're greeting each other," Joan said in awe. "Yes, it's called bill fencing. People say they mate for life," Glenn said quietly. "But sometimes they return to the same rock, and their mate doesn't. I was glad to learn they often find another mate." Joan turned her head to find Glenn looking at her. The last remnants of fog cleared, and the sun painted his face in a golden hue. Joan filled her lungs with the ocean air as the sun enveloped them in warmth. Walking back to the bus, Joan's foot slipped on the wet grass. She reached out and grabbed Glenn's arm. It was strong and steady. "I got you," Glenn said meaningfully. Tucked back into her seat, Joan looked out the window at the retreating cliffs and thought, "Thank you, Bill." Years later, Glenn spreads a blanket over the grass across from the sea stack. Joan pulls him down beside her and twines her fingers through his. A gannet swoops overhead and lets out a cry to welcome them. It lands on a rocky ledge and is met by its mate. Their bills come together in the centuries-old greeting.
All that glitters. They're trudging through mud as thick as honey, have been for days. Everything is silent and still, other than the squelch of their boots lifting out of the muck. There's not much left alive to make sounds. Rebecca moves slowly, methodically. She's careful not to get any of the sludge on her skin. All they need is another reaction. Their arms and legs are covered in scars from festering lesions, scratched raw, then healed over. The ridge they're climbing seems endless. Rebecca's feet and calves ache. The straps of her backpack dig into her flesh. Her N95 mask rubs relentlessly at her face, already calloused from a year of friction. The mask is the gray of used dishwater left to sour in the sink. Rebecca and Thomas used to fight about such things in the time before. Now arguing is a luxury they can't afford. Surprisingly, she misses it. She can just make out the delicate perfume of the poison through her mask. Who knew something that smelled so sweet could be so deadly? A month ago, she picked a direction at random and they started walking. Thomas reasoned they'd get to the ocean eventually. There are rumors the earth and air are safe there. She has her doubts, but staying in the forest is a death sentence. After a week of hiking, she fell against Thomas and let fat, hot tears soak into his shirt. It was too hard. There was nowhere safe to rest. "You can lean on me," he said, wrapping her in a hug. Now Rebecca eyes him on the mud path in front of her. His head gives off a golden glow. It's like a halo in a religious painting from the Middle Ages. She tries not to think of it. Instead, she focuses on the heart-shaped birthmark on his right arm, nestled in the tapestry of scars. It's her North Star. She trudges toward it. She sighs and takes her hands from the backpack straps and massages them down her sides. Everything hurts. She can feel each rib protruding through her thin skin. The last time she looked in a mirror, all her bones jutted out. All her features were razor sharp. She remembers her soft and doughy body from the time before with nostalgia. She hated it then. Thomas is the only thing left from Rebecca's time before. And he's a sliver of his former self, too. Not even a toothful, her mother might have said if she were alive. They crest the mountain, and in the distance she sees it. Blue waves crashing against a pebbled shore. Thomas forgets his exhaustion and lets out a whoop. She doesn't have the heart to tell him about his new crown of light. It's one of the first signs of being compromised. He'll be dead in a week. Let him enjoy this.